Hello class, today we're going to look at populations. So population ecology is the study of population, so the number of species in a particular area and how it relates to its environmental influences. So when we talk about population size, there are 4 factors that affect that population size. We are going to be looking at things like birth rate, natality, so the number of offspring that are born in 1 year, mortality or death rate, the number of offspring that die in 1 year. Immigration is going to be the offspring that move into an existing population, and emigration is going to be an offspring that moves out of an existing population. So immigration is in, emigration is out. So population size, we can figure out population growth using our formula. So again, once we know kind of what the population is at the beginning of a year, we can figure out its growth by taking the birth rate and the immigrations and minusing the deaths and the emigrations. So if we look at this particular example, we know that the beginning population is 80 squirrels. Okay, so over the year, some things happened. So over the years, we know that 3 baby squirrels were born, 1 died, 4 immigrated into from a neighboring forest, and 1 emigrated. Okay, and so it's looking for that growth at the end of the year. So we know that 3 were born and 4 immigrated. We know that 1 died and 1 emigrated. So 7 minus 2 is going to give us a change of 5. We had 80 squirrels to begin with. This is a positive number, so it's increasing our population growth to 85 at the end of the year. Okay, so that's kind of how population growth can be calculated. So when we look at types of populations, we have open populations versus closed populations. So an open population is going to be in a population where all 4 of those factors that we just talked about can affect that population. So this is going to happen in a natural ecosystem. So a park, a natural park, a national park, in nature. So again, the animals can come and go as they wish. Births, deaths are going to happen naturally. Whereas a closed population, there is going to be no immigration or emigration. They cannot leave or come into that particular population. So examples would be like an aquarium or a zoo. The animals can, they can reproduce, they can produce more. So births, they can die, deaths are going to happen, but there's no moving in or moving out of that population. So limits on population. So why do we not see millions and millions of mice when we look out the window? So there are many factors that can limit a population. They can be both biotic or abiotic. So biotic potential, okay, are limits on the population of a species, and that are imposed by the species itself. So by definition, biotic potential is the maximum number of offspring that a species could produce if resources were unlimited. So if there were no other factors affecting that population, they didn't have to worry about anything, the maximum number of offspring a species could produce would be your biotic potential. There are 4 factors that will affect biotic potential. So we want to go through those 4 factors. So the first factor is going to be your birth potential. So the maximum number of offspring per birth. So again, when you look at dogs, small dogs will generally only have 1 or 2 babies per birth, per litter, whereas larger breeds could have as many as 10 puppies per litter. Rabbits have 7 to 15 in a litter with regards to its birth potential. So again, the number that it can have per birth. Capacity for survival would be the second factor. So the number of offspring that are going to reach a reproductive age. So fish lay millions of eggs. Okay, so how many of them are going to make it to an age where they would then be able to reproduce? That's your capacity for survival. Fish lay hundreds of eggs turtles lay hundreds of eggs in on the beach, and so when those turtles hatch, only so many are going to make it out of the hole, only so many are going to make it to the water, and even less are going to make it in the water to an age where they can then reproduce. That's survival, or capacity for survival. So again, your rabbits would be another example. They leave their nest at around 15 days. So again, how many of those rabbits are going to survive long enough to make it to an age where they can then reproduce themselves? Third factor is your procreation. So the number of times that a species reproduces each year. Robins will nest twice a year, so in the spring and late summer. Rabbits can have 1 to 7 litters in a year. Deer only generally reproduce in the spring once a year. So again, different species have that. The number of times they reproduce a year will be different. The fourth factor is going to be your length of reproductive life. Okay, so the age of sexual maturity and the number of years that individual can then reproduce. So we know that human females are fertile for about 25-ish years. So again, from the onset of puberty at around 12 years, they'll be able to reproduce until about 35, 40 years without producing too many complications. Elephants have a really long length of reproductive life. They can reproduce until they're like 90s. Rabbits are able to reproduce at around 12 weeks and can reproduce only until they're about 4 years old, if they make it to 4. Okay, so next we want to look at limiting factors. So any factor that restricts the size of a population would be a limiting factor. So organisms are best able to survive within a particular range. So for example, certain bacteria only are able to live within a temperature of 30 to 32 degrees Celsius. So if that temperature changes, increases or decreases, it's going to affect that bacteria's ability to survive. So species may have a broad range of tolerance for some factors and a narrow range for others. And these factors could be either abiotic or biotic in nature. So when we look at abiotic factors, some examples of abiotic factors are temperature, the amount of light, the chemical environment. So when we talk about water, you might look at the pH, how acidic that water is of that lake or pond. So again, those are abiotic factors that might limit a population. Biotic factors that might limit a population could be the amount of food in an area, the number of predators that are hunting, disease or parasites, competition for resources. So again, the more competition, the more of a limiting factor it would be. So when we look at tolerance versus optimal range. So again, our tolerance range is going to be conditions within a specific range in which the species can survive. Whereas our optimal range are conditions within a specific range which a species are best adapted for. So again, if we look at this graph, okay, our abiotic factor is our independent variable here at the bottom. It could be temperature, it could be talking about pH, and within this range here, this is our optimal range. These fish are going to survive within this range of that. So if we're talking about temperature, it would be from this temperature to that temperature. That is their optimal range. Majority, that is when we're going to have the highest population. if that temperature either decreases, changes to here, or increases to here, we're going to start seeing a change in population. It's definitely going to decrease our population, and that would be our tolerance range. So again, it's decreased, it's got a little colder. Those fish, some are going to die off, their populations are going to decrease, but some will survive. If it decreases any more into this pink zone on either end, the species won't survive. So again, it's past the point of a tolerance level, and it's not going to survive. Okay, so again, our population numbers is going to decrease to that 0 range at the bottom here, is what you're seeing on this particular graph. Okay, so this would be your kind of a tolerance graph, sharing the information on a particular factor and how it's going to affect population or of a particular species. So carrying capacity is going to be the maximum population size of a species that a given ecosystem can support. So again, if you looked at a particular ecosystem, so maybe you're looking at Algonquin Park, it's going to be the maximum population that that wolf population that ecosystem can support that wolf population. Okay, so that's kind of the max amount of wolves that could survive in the park. So abiotic or biotic factors can prevent populations from obtaining or reaching its biotic potential. So those factors would be factors that are preventing it from reaching its potential. So carrying capacity, if you look at the graph, carrying capacity tends to be that maximum range. So again, we see the ups and downs, and it tends to start to plateau. It's that carrying capacity tends to be that average range in our population where we start to see things start to plateau. Okay, so again, that average range of where that organism can survive. Population graphs. So when we're looking at population graphs or population curves, there's 2 types that we can see. So we can see A, which is the first one here, which is exponential growth, which is that huge increase or quick increase in population, and this growth is unsustainable. Okay, an organism usually can't sustain this type of growth. It can't keep going and going and going unrestricted. Something's going to happen. So logistical growth is obviously this graph, and you're starting to see that increase, right? But then you will start to see it start to plateau or flatten out, and that's what makes this growth more sustainable. You can see that this average kind of point here is where you're going to start to see that carrying capacity, where that number is that ecosystem can sustain. Okay, so the last slide here would be other factors that affect population size. And so we want to look at density dependent versus density independent factors. Okay, so density dependent factors are those that have an increase or decrease effect depending on the number of organisms that are presented in a specific area. So the factors are density dependent. It is dependent upon the number. So disease, predation, the availability of food. These factors can affect the population size based on the number. If there's not a lot of wolves in the park, then the availability of food is not going to be a factor that is going to affect it. It doesn't matter in this case. Okay, whereas density independent factors are those factors that will affect that population regardless of the population density. It doesn't matter if there's one animal or hundreds of animals. These factors will affect that population. Natural disasters, human intervention, climate change are all examples of what's going to affect that population no matter what the population density or size of that population is. Okay, so that is our note on population. Thank